Welcome on La Chaîne Politique. So, as promised, we will continue on talking on this video about the Turkish influence, which is described by its critics as a Turkish interference. And this time we will talk more about the growing influence of Turkey in the Arab Gulf states. So, as you know, 1 month ago, the United Arab Emirates recognized Israel, and in the aftermath, in the wake of this recognition, the Arab League convened a meeting, but no condemnation has arisen in this meeting about this recognition of the state of Israel by UAE, the United Arab Emirates and Bahrain, and instead condemnation has been stated against, I quote, Turkish interference. So it was really interesting to see that now the recognition of Israel by some Arab states do not bother other Arab states, but the Turkish interference or the Turkish influence, everyone would try to find what is the correct word for him or for her, but is much more embarrassing or much more bothering for some Arab states, in particular for the United Arab Emirates, which declared through its foreign minister, Mr. Anwar Gargash, the Turkish military presence in the Arab Gulf is an emergency. It reinforces polarization and does not take into account the sovereignty of Arab states and the interests of those states. So we see clearly that Mr. Gargash is playing if I can like the resentment, or is playing against the neo-Ottomanist policy of Turkey. He's trying to show that Turkey is trying again to colonize those countries and trying to place the independence of those countries like we were 100 years ago, that Turkey has had the control of this territory. But we have to be clear. So this rhetoric has find some echo, find some let's say found some ground in those Arabic states, which still think that Turkey tries a bit to reconquer its influence, which is seen by some people positively, in Qatar, for example, in Kuwait, in Oman, which are still, I would call them Turkey-friendly country, and but this Turkish influence is received is much it doesn't is not received in good way, let's say in the UAE, in the United Arab Emirates, or in Saudi Arabia, or in Bahrain. So what we can say is, so we know that the diplomatic stance has been the diplomatic ties have been strengthened between those countries over the last years. But let's say over the last days, those diplomatic strengths have been, let's say, reinforced by or has been turned into an economic boycott by those countries, due to the fact that the head of the Chamber of Commerce from Saudi Arabia called last week of a boycott of, I quote, Turkish goods. We never reach such point in the region where all those diplomatic issues have never, let's say, been translated into an economic boycott. Saudi Arabia also have never refrained its citizens to go to Turkey, and right now is asked to all to its citizens to stay home, not to go to Turkey. So how come? Let's raise this question: how come we reach such a now and this level where those states now wants to, let's say, go to another step, which is economic war against Turkey, and how come we arrive to such point right now? So we have to be clear. Turkey, those countries also protest against the protection of Turkey to Qatar, due to the fact that Turkey hosts a military base in Qatar, or as it is revealed a couple of days ago by the Qatar's minister of defense, Qatar those states, Saudi Arabia and the UAE, plan to invade Qatar in 2017, but probably those plans have been thwarted, have been countered by the presence of Turkish troops in Qatar. And so we see clearly that so it's a source of embarrassment for those countries who cannot set up their plan like to invade Qatar. So we see clearly that they try to find a way to gain some military edge. And probably the recognition of Israel by the UAE can be explained through this spectrum, due to the fact that UAE, thanks to the fact of recognizing Israel, has been able to buy F-35, which has been denied to the state during years by the United States, not to give, let's say, military superiority to UAE compared with Israel. But with the recognition, Israel has accepted, reluctantly, we have to say, but accepted anyway, the sale of those F-35 to the UAE. So right now, the United States will deliver over the next month this very precious, let's say, air jet. But at the same time, today, Israel has announced that it rejects, let's say, the request from Qatar to get this 35 jet, so which will translate from a military perspective by a military advantage of the United Arab Emirates compared with Qatar, which will not receive such equipment. So we see very clearly that UAE is trying to play now against Turkey on various grounds, on economic grounds, and now also on diplomatic grounds, with let's say with the recognition of Israel and having closer ties with Israel, and closer ties also ultimately with the United States, because thanks to this recognition of Israel, now UAE has much more influence than Qatar in the United States, and it is probably the ultimate goal of the United Arab Emirates through this historical move. And that's why many actually observers say that United Arab Emirates recognize Israel to counter not the Iranian, let's say, influence, but to counter the Turkish influence, which is much more actually alarming and concerning for the Emirati leaders than Iranian one. Because as you see, Iran do not counter the objective and, let's say, the military campaign of the various military campaign of the UAE in Libya, in Syria, in Yemen, whereas Turkey try to counter each military campaign of the United Arab Emirates in order to, let's say, show that Turkey, from a military point of view, is much stronger than it. And now, so in order to counter this Turkish influence, you will see how the United Arab Emirates is now resorting to various scenario, recognizing Israel, now calling to an economic boycott of Turkish goods, threatening Qatar more and more, because even today, not later than today, the Turkish also foreign minister, the same ministers that declared that the Turkish influence is negative for the region, also declared today that Qatar is an element of Turkish presence in Qatar is an element of instability. So we see that this region is more, once again, very tense, and all those economic, diplomatic maneuver could also now bring not only a proxy war between UAE and Turkey, like it is the case in Syria and Libya, but maybe to a direct confrontation, perhaps through in Qatar, because Qatar also could could now the impatience, let's say the fruitless of the blockade of UAE and Saudi Arabia, the fact that there is no, so this blockade did not yield to any result, could also push those countries to opt for the military support against Qatar, due to the fact that the incumbent US president is much more probably favorable of those countries than probably the next one. So they are probably using, let's say, this window opportunity before the US election, probably to lead a military maneuver against Turkey and Qatar over the next days or weeks.